So just welcome everybody. Thank you, and thank you for coming to this. It's really at the moment we're just sort of discussing how we might position ourselves internationally as a discipline in the kind of new reality of pressures and changes in the art school system and in arts education and in research in particular, as that's one of the areas that they often cite as one of the shortcomings occasionally whenever they want to give it excuses for reducing some of the things that we do. So it's about not so much being driven entirely by the agenda of the neoliberals or the authorities that run universities and the ARC and other such organizations around the world, but at least having a discussion about what we mean by the research that we do and how, as a group of people or connecting to other groups of people, we might become peers and we might become the kind of entities that STEM already have and the sciences already have generally. So that's kind of it. Alan, does that sort of equate to a summary of how we're going about this at the moment?
Yeah, yes, it does. And there's also the other thing that we talked about of establishing this international peak body to begin with, which can help to oversee this. But but it's not exclusive; it's totally inclusive, and I think that's important. So that everybody, and I think people from the creative industries, as we were chatting earlier, should also be welcomed into this, so that it's strength in numbers, isn't it? Which is what we've always said,
So before we have a general discussion, there's a couple of things. One is, let's see if we are able to agree the kind of body that this might be, or at least an association, a loose association of people who are committed to the things that we're all working for and work for all our careers. And how we bring on, help to bring on the next generation of people that will lead this and do completely different things to where I would personally take it. It so that we give that opportunity for some legacy stuff and people actually taking the future on. So that's one. That's the peak body piece, so that there is some kind of authority in terms of reviewing everything from research to giving at least a list of people that can be relied upon to mark your PhDs or review your courses. So that's one. Then it's really one of the interesting things when we first started doing research. To be honest, the models came from elsewhere. The models that we used to apply to our research didn't fit, were always clunky. It was also evidenced in the some of the ARC grant opportunities around the world that we didn't really fit. And often the descriptors of some of the 4 codes, the research codes that we have to come under, which affects the way we do our PhDs as well, didn't fit. So we're looking at something called a non-traditional, so anything that's not written is a non-traditional here, a non-traditional set of outputs, and how do we assess those? And those are actually drawings, paintings, artworks of all description. So we've looked at establishing 3 areas that we could start to categorize, because categorizing is an important part of doing research, so that we can actually, when you've categorized something, you can actually start to agree what the qualities and values are so that it can be assessed properly. And at the moment, it's very hit and miss, and that's not doing us any good. So we have an event coming up, a research event, and we wanted to test this by offering people opportunity to take part in what is really a test. It is like a beta model test. And that is to look at 3 categories. One, and you'll be familiar with this if you supervise PhDs. So there's the first category is design-led. That's where you're creating work that actually helps to form the field. Design-based, where it's more of a historical look, where you're looking at the historical relevance of the field, how it's changed, what its characteristics are. So you've got design-led, which is making and contributing things that have been commissioned, things that have been agreed by the ARC, which you then produce artwork for, in the same way that a chemist would create a theory and then expose the theory to practice, and that practice then gives them a way of interrogating the theory, and we learn from the practice and the theory together. Research based is based on things that are already there, and you're uncovering the gaps in knowledge in the past. And then there's this interesting area, which I think is going to be like a cutting edge thing, but it is difficult to explain, and that is the speculative research. And that to me is where you're probably going to get the most interesting stuff, because that may well be the cutting edge stuff that doesn't quite fit these categories. But I think we can make then at least have a language and a rationale around what speculative work is, because if you don't do any speculative, that's the same as theorizing in physics. If you don't speculate, you don't theorize, and we theorize through making, then you don't discover black holes in physics. But then there's a whole bunch of other cultural, social, and creative discoveries that you don't make if you simply tie people down to established base of research. That's probably as good as explanation as I can give. Does that hold water? Does that make sense? Does that make any sense to anyone? Does that sort of sound possible? Andy, you're laughing.
Well, I'm laughing, Mary, only because, just trying to categorize this stuff is tricky, and trying to get something which works as a, one of the things I think I completely agree about the idea that, there's an element of borrowing methodologies from other disciplines and trying to use them within your own. And, I'd be very hopeful that the last sort of 10 years have shown that, there is a thing called illustration research methods, and people at least are kind of coming above the parapet and trying to push some of those ideas. I think it's probably fair to say that some of those observations are used elsewhere in other disciplines. If you look at sort of kind of design research, there's definitely some crossovers there. But I do think illustration offers something which is in addition to, rather than in respect of, design research, depending on where you land. And that's why I think your point about speculative, the speculative nature of things. I was smiling because I was kind of thinking, yeah, that's where people make mistakes. And actually, right, what I see an awful lot of are that there's a fear of mistake making, which I kind of understand where that has arisen from, but I would love to be able to kind of eradicate it. And so, the speculative nature of research, I think, is definitely, it would be great to see that populated for the event in January, as a way really of kind of providing like a signpost or a marker about, okay, so this is what you mean by speculative stuff. And I think that probably if you went along, in my case, the line here, there, some of the work that Gary's doing with the, the whole kind of augmented reality, even though there's an element of that which is kind of known because there is theory around kind of augmented reality and what that potentially can do, I don't think there's much information that I've found anyway about how audiences or how recipients respond to an augmented reality presentation of information in a new guise. And, so for me, yes, there is an element of what Gary is doing, which is definitely practice-led. I don't want to speak on your behalf, Gary, and you can do this far better than I can. I've only just read what you've written and watched what you've done. But, for me, that might be something that fits the speculative category.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, that's. I thought you were talking about a different Gary, actually. I was surprised anyone's actually looked at that. But really good. Yeah, it's early days, really. I am kind of enjoying using a technology that isn't really familiar to me. And I really agree with what you're saying about risk taking. It's something that I've found with my current second years. I don't know whether it was lockdown that increased that sense of being risk averse, but there was one point when I introduced the module that I'm running at the moment, and I actually stopped and said, "What's wrong with you?" Because I was trying to get some kind of feedback from some of the stuff I was showing them was really quite, complicated, contentious stuff. And normally I get a real dialogue going because it's an abstract module I'm running, and there was nothing. And I said, "What is going on?" And when I originally briefed them to do a soundscape over the summer, I was getting questions that I've never had before. They wanted to know how to do it and how to get good marks. And I said, "I want you to fuck up." I want you to fail, but fail brilliantly. If I tell you how to do it, I'm just going to get what I get every year. And it seemed, revolutionary to them. And I don't know whether there's something happening at, within our education, secondary schools, primary schools. But the other project I'm running with Chelsea and Westminster Hospital in London, where we're working with doctors and consultants and clinicians, we've been running workshops, and it's really interesting. They sign up for these workshops, and immediately, some of them are quite passive aggressive in the fact that I've just come to watch, I'm not drawing. And when you say, "Well, what's your relationship with drawing?" It's like, "I'm shit at drawing, I can't draw." And then we have a conversation about that, and we discover actually going back, they remember a time when they enjoyed drawing. And there's something going on with this idea of what is drawing, and this idea of academic, analytical, good drawing. And then we just started discussing about what point does that happen where people shut off from drawing. And it might be at school where people are told they either can draw or they can't. So they go into another area and they forget that actually, there's many different ways of drawing. So we're looking at, maybe visual dyslexia, which I don't know if there's been that much research done into it. And, obviously a lot of our students are dyslexic, but, the idea of visual dyslexia, where you get word blindness, where people aren't traditionally good in that kind of academic analytical sense of drawing. Maybe there's ways we can facilitate them to actually embrace drawing in a much wider multidisciplinary way. And I think the work in AR and VR is something that, when you see, including myself, I was filmed when I was actually in VR, and I was like a kid. It was just opened up this huge playground, really. And I'm trying to encourage my students to be a little bit more multidisciplinary and find new ways of working. But yeah, sorry, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, I'm kind of interested in the idea of facilitating
into teaching.
Yeah, I'm going to cut out now, but thanks.
I might just jump in because I know that there'll be lots of things to talk about after this, but I thought probably just to begin, it might be before we unpack some of the other things, is to get Luke O'Donnell and Alex Barnes-Keoghan, who are our tech officers here at the uni, to kind of present a little bit of an idea about how that exhibition will work in an operational sort of way, and sort of talk to what they've developed and some of the things that they've kind of worked through, just to kick it off and give you a bit of an idea of what we were thinking for that too. So I'm Ari, by the way, for those I haven't met too.
Oh, do you know, I'm really sorry. I thought everybody knew each other. Can we get through this and then we'll go through? I really apologize. I'm so sorry. I'm so shit at chairing stuff. Alan, can you do the next one? Anyone do the next one? Yes, let's do that one first, and then we'll go round. Ari, thank you. And I do apologize to everyone. I just assumed sorry. Yes, please, Luke and Alex, I do beg your pardon.
Yeah, no worries. So I guess just as I do the traditional Zoom dance that we're all used to at this point, getting the screen share up and running. Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to go over what some of the stuff that we've been doing here in the School of Creative Industries at Newcastle Uni. So as we've all been dealing with this frustrating COVID situation, others more than others, others more than some. Every year we put on our student graduation festival, much like everyone else, but we were struck with the situation where we couldn't put on those traditional galleries, art showcases, screenings that we could. So as part of that process of developing a solution, much like everyone else around the world, of how we could deliver that online, we did an evaluation of what do galleries look like in the online space? What platforms were out there that enabled us to take our artwork out to the world online? But one of the things we found is that we just weren't quite satisfied with what we saw. So for our end of year festival last year, we chose to develop something in-house using Unity, the video game engine, and then publish that online. So what you're going to see a bit here is actually a sneak peek of, we've suffered the exact same problem again this year due to a flare-up in our states. We are again delivering that completely online. And this is the virtual gallery for the festival, which is actually going live tomorrow, I must say. It's quite opportune timing. So this one's actually hot off the press. We've just finished this today, very fresh in the mind. So one of the things that we saw with traditional gallery experiences in the online space is they didn't quite respect some of the things that we've gotten used to with just our traditional analog galleries, and instead focused on more of the gimmicky features of what you could do in a 3D environment. So how we developed this piece was instead the core foundation that we wanted everything to feel as real as possible and not introduce anything strange to the user. Because if we're facing a transition from an analog experience online and our user base is all of a sudden exposed to something that's quite foreign, to solve that user accessibility, user experience transition, keep it as familiar as possible. So these are just a couple of screenshots of what we've been putting together today. Or sorry, just the last fortnight, that will go live tomorrow. But as part of that suite of tools, emulating as much as possible, you run into a few unique problems. Largely, while it is, everyone's used to walking around, but not everyone's used to walking around with a keyboard and mouse. So we've had to implement a few tests we trialed a few things. This is what we found was the best way. So as we go into the experience, I'll just show a short video of what it actually currently functions. The moment that it starts, users are greeted with an instructions page on how to use it. And they're also able to bring this back up at any time if they get lost. But once they move into the experience, they're dropped into our traditional gallery foyer space, which we're separating out to our different gallery rooms. So in the case of this one, it's 2 gallery rooms, whereas for the proposed gallery with being 4 rooms, it would probably be a design that branches out into those distinct spaces. But as part of what we can provide, we've got obviously the standard stuff. Poster work, illustration work is really easy to represent in a digital environment like this. It's simple as digitally printing it out onto a model and then placing it into the space. But we've got additional things, like for example, a lot of our students, because we have mostly focusing on visual communication design students in this space, they have a lot of web work that they want to exhibit. Traditionally, we would have a series of computers with that work there in the space that someone could play with, but because they're already in a web browser, what we can do is they can walk up to the computer and we have it coded in that when they click on it, it actually opens up that web page in the next tab that they can then experience and return back to. This is also the same for other problems that you face. Oh, hang on, that video has just reset itself. That's quite nice. Other things you have in this space, while we're in a digital environment, we're all used to going into a gallery, picking up a book and being able to flick through someone's magazine illustration work. It's harder to do when we're all aligned with a computer. So to solve those problems, we turn to pre-existing solutions that are already out there. So there's a number of services that can do magazines and emulate that experience quite well. So rather than recreate it, we've again used that functionality and they just link straight out to those services. In this case, our preferred one is Issue, just for print publications. Just as it plays through. So I'll just pause on this one. There's we're all familiar with the problem with image resolution as we send out to print. That is one of the challenges we face in the virtual environment, though, is the balance between resolution and size. But that's something that we have the ability to scale up and down depending on the work, because we don't want it to be too large, because if it's too large, everyone will take too long to download it and we won't see users into the space. So we preference it down, but for those works that need the extra resolution, that we give it to them so you'll be able to read the text. But then the experience itself has the ability to showcase video work alongside it. And of course, the one that we're most familiar with, the artist panel, so the user can walk up to get a little bit of extra information about the artist. It's not enabled on this feature, on this particular build, but we also have the functionality that we've in the past put portfolio links to all of our students' portfolio sites so that they would have instant access to all their work, solving that problem that we have in the analog environment where we're all handing out business cards and hoping someone comes and looks at our websites. But now it's just as simple as a click in the virtual space. So that's a small snapshot of what this one looks like. But yeah, we've got the flexibility of tailoring it visually to the exhibition itself. So last year we had 7 galleries, each one with their own distinct style. But because it's virtual, again, some of the things that are harder to do physically is with massive floor decals, big wall pieces. It's free in the virtual environment, so there's a lot more flexibility to tailor the space more to your requirements. So that's me about the look and the feel. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Alex, who's to talk a little bit about the work that he's been doing in the space. Looking at putting together tools that we can gain metric data about what users are doing in the space and how we can evaluate the effectiveness of galleries, something that's quite difficult to do in the physical space. So I'll just hand over to you, Alex.
Awesome. Just do the little dance across. Get my PowerPoint running. Okay, that's gone across onto the wrong screen, hasn't it?
Yeah. Just go up to display settings on that one, and then right at the top, display settings, and then you should be able to swap screen under display settings.
Okay, sorry.
A year into it, and we're all still running.
I know. You really
problem.
think it's well presented. Here we go. Okay, so yes, as working as Luke's co-worker for the past how many years now, maybe 5 years or so. I was one of the primary people who helped install all these works digitally, and after getting Luke whipping my back constantly saying, okay, we need this in, you start to think, are virtual galleries worth it? So the past year I've spent researching into different ways that we can evaluate virtual galleries and whether we can test their effectiveness and these sorts of things. So I've just got a couple of more screenshots from various galleries that we've worked on in the past. So yeah, like with virtual galleries, you can't download drinks and have your canapes and show it off and see your friends' reactions there and then all surrounding you. But what they do form is a really, really good form of documentation. And as you've seen with the different kinds of galleries that we've been able to create, you can really tailor it to the story, to the narrative of the works. So with the research that I've been looking into, I've tried to find as much as I can about the virtual galleries, but because it is so new, there really hasn't been much in regards to published papers and things. So I've more backtracked to traditional gallery research and what they've done. I've looked into a bit of video game research and the user experiences, interactions, and we've incorporated quite a few more of those elements as we've made more galleries. We've been add more usability features to make it just easier to navigate through and make it feel less like you're wandering through a bunker, and get the lighting and things correct as much as possible. And with some of the the traditional gallery research, it was interesting to see they often talk about attraction power and holding power of different artworks. So, you know, attraction power, like how likely is someone to go walk over to that artwork, and then the holding power, how long do they spend in front of it? How long do they just, you know, really spend the time taking it all in? And that's quite hard to measure in a traditional gallery, because you'd have to have someone either there just watching over your shoulder, like writing down with little stopwatches, or have a camera system heat tracking across the entire gallery, which has been done. There was a couple of interesting ones over in Spain where they were tracking a whole bunch of different people in some of the museums just to see what exhibits really held people's attention. But in a virtual space, it's quite easy. We just use the same system that you see on the TVs, which is a trigger-based sort of stopwatch. So when you get inside this invisible trigger, it starts a stopwatch. And that allows you to be able to track different timers. You could track, you know, how long someone watches a video compared to an illustration or maybe a text-based work. So being able to develop a little feedback plugin that will that can export out that data and then provide some quantitative information in the form of some passive feedback. The other thing that's really cool is the qualitative feedback in the form of active feedback that you might get maybe from a visitor's a feedback book that they write down, you know, their favorite comments about their favorite artworks and whatnot. And I've been looking at creating that sort of system inside this gallery. So an in-game, in-gallery survey that they can complete or vote for their favorite works. That kind of thing can be really, just other sort of information that we can capture. So I might just show a quick little video. So this is actually inside one of the galleries, and on the right-hand side, you can see some of the gallery time just starting to add up there. And, you know, you could put 101 different stopwatches to be able to track anything you like. You know, we could have this, these are all tests, you know, you can remove this, you don't have to have a name input, and they can walk around inside the gallery. And we can track things like clicks as well. So whether they're clicking on and interacting on the artwork, so it fires as an interaction click when they click on a particular artwork. We can also track if they get stuck looking at the ground, which is quite handy. So we can see whether people get locked out. And yeah, then it exports it out as a CSV into a nice researcher-friendly CSV where you can actually get hundreds and hundreds of different results out from that. I guess kind of any questions? Yeah.
Just before we throw to questions there, just one thing that I forgot to add. Two of the major things that we found, while the traditional gallery experience is preferred, particularly for that social element, but probably more when it comes to research as well, the opportunities with the virtual galleries is it kind of solves the two main problems with a gallery exhibition and its connection to research, is its geolocational restriction and access for people to see it, as well as its permanence. Virtual gallery itself, anyone can see it in the world, and it can stay up as long as you pay the person in IT to keep it up for you. And it's an insignificant fee. So it does have a bit of flexibility. Yeah, just throw that to any questions. Otherwise, if no one's got any, throw it back to you, Ari, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess in discussions with Luke and Alex, one of the things that we've been talking about in terms of this group was, I guess, enhancing that global capacity. And Alan and I were talking about this just before, the idea that we can, in spaces like this, present work from a range of different people all over the place without it having to be so localized in terms of, I guess, promoting the work that people are doing, the original idea of having a body of work that people can look to as an established resource from everybody's, you know, significant work in all of the different spaces that they are doing, whether it be, you know, from cultural production perspective, practice-based, practice-led, or more speculative work. And that in the initial meetings when we had talked about the role of drawing and all sorts of different things. One of the big things is, I guess, profiling that work and being able people to be able to have that experience of the work that isn't just a still in a paper somewhere, that they can have that, but also the ability for us to actually have, I guess, empirical data of people's exploration of the gallery, which is something that actually gives that little bit more of quantitative weight to the qualitative experience of the galleries. And I think that's kind of, although not perhaps the same experience as a gallery, and we all love going to a gallery and seeing work, that this could be just a different tool in order to promote the research, conversation on top of that kind of, I guess, consolidating people's opinions about what that is, when everybody is being challenged by that across the sector. I guess that's my little statement, and that, I put in a bit of a bid for this for the conference, because we are hosting it here at Newcastle, and spoken to Mario and Andrew Howells as well about that process and what it could look like. And a lot of you have been really keen to be engaged with that, I think, from across everyone that I emailed. So that's quite exciting. I think that people want to be involved, or at least involved in this conversation, even if they don't have work that they have right now to throw in. It could be something that Luke and Alex said, it doesn't have to be just attached to that gallery, the conference. It can be pulled out and displayed in different formats as well. So it could be a sort of repository of how to do this sort of process, I guess. Mario, did you want to
Linda
jump in there?
Linda, what do you reckon?
Thanks to Alex and Luke for sort of sticking
around. Thanks, Alex and Luke. Thank you for saving the day.
No worries,
and doing work. Linda, what do you reckon?
I think it's great. I think it's really good. I was just typed in there that I think especially it's a great resource for neurodiverse people who perhaps can engage with the technology and the work at the same time, if you know what I mean. So it would have a really great amount of interest for neurodiverse people, both adults and young people, I think, which is it's very difficult for neurodiverse people to go to galleries. And I think that would be a great avenue to promote through this space, as well as the avenues we'd already thought about. So that, I think it's wonderful, actually.
Well, thank you. Good. Christian, you had your hand up for a second, was it?
I'm sorry, that was a clap. That was a reaction, but
good.
But there, I mean, there are things that I was interested in. I mean, I think one thing that's interesting is this virtual gallery seems to offer lots of other questions as well about the presentation of work in virtual environments, and I suppose that relationship between geographies of gaming and geographies of exhibition. So there are all sorts of things that I was sort of thinking about as the presentation went on. One of them was that relationship between illustration and the gallery, but also that relationship between the gallery. I mean, you were talking about how you wanted to keep this sort of traditional gallery presentation, and I was intrigued as to why, because I was kind of thinking, well, there's lots of potential in what we, in terms of gaming, in terms of the kinds of environments that are built. And there's quite a bit of research, as you've obviously discovered in game environments. So I was sort of intrigued as the actual environment itself having that kind of feel of a traditional gallery, yet being deliberately trying to break some sense of what a traditional presentation might be. So that's raised questions for me about how I think about those ideas.
Can I just quickly say, I think one of the challenges we have is if we did something that was, and I agree with everything you said, it was too off the experiences that people already have. I'm not sure how we can, really get people to understand it. I think it's hard enough at the moment. But what this really is a research evidence tool for us all. And it's a way of, I think there used to be two mantras in the universities that we are now part of. One was publish or perish, and publish or perish just meant traditional forms of writing, peer review, monographs, books, and papers. So it's publish or perish, and that is for the majority of people in the university sector, that's still the fact. Then there's another piece that's come through because of the shift in technology, but also because art and design have come into these establishments, and they have to be more than teaching. We have to do more than teach. And they did rely on us to do a lot of teaching. Somewhere like engineering that has almost absolutely no females in it for a start and hardly any students some days, really relied on art and design to have all the female members of the student body and actually to lift a lot of their teaching. Sometimes we did their teaching for them. So it was publish or perish. And then the bit that came in was demonstrate or die. Demonstrate what you do. And actually what this platform is doing is enabling us to do both. Because if you see what we're trying to set up, and I think this is really difficult because it's just something that we have to engage with, I think, sooner or later, is that there is a policy that we will, and every country will have its equivalent of non-traditional research, and how do we rank that work? And I think at least what we can do here is test what that might look like for us. And what we as the peers, so we will peer review this, what we as the peers will see as valuable. And we need to give a structure and a language to that assessment. And I don't think that is any different really from the kind of peer review work that you do in a conference. And it will be made up of, say, 2 established professors, 2 mid-career reviewers, and 2 people who are doing their PhDs and are actually fresh on the trail of this. So they can at least, there's nothing to lose or gain, but it is a test. It is a prototype of whether we can make sense of our own non-traditional research and the work that we do in this space that moves beyond publish or perish, a monograph, and looks at those 3 areas of practice-led, practice-based, and speculative practice. And that's really what we're doing. And the outcomes of that will be that we will be able to give a qualitative, because there'll be things there, and a quantitative and qualitative address to this stuff. And at least we'll have a narrative, a story about how we've done this and how this might then look like in the future. And I think you're right, this can remain online so people can interrogate both the written outcomes, the frame that we've had to work to, because each piece of work that you put in will have to have an abstract, that will have to explain what it is that you're contributing to the field, whether it's something new or whether you're adjusting something that's already known in the field in a novel way. And those things are the same challenges no matter what discipline you're in or where you are in the world. So that's really the offer. Andrew, you had your hand up, so.
Yeah, I was just adding to that comment before about those sort of potential other questions that come around the virtual gallery and the experience and why we went down the path of that, I guess, traditional feel to a gallery. So I was part of the team that worked with Luke and Alex in running that online festival the first time last year. And when we first started talking to students about it, we were in that live moment where suddenly the end of year show was going and we were proposing going online, and there was a barrier to engagement with the whole idea of their work being a gimmick in a gimmick context and things they were familiar with about established platforms where a gallery was grab this kind of wall, grab that kind of stone plinth and do this. They felt that there wasn't almost the same authenticity as a gallery, and the integrity of their work might be compromised as a play value, as a novelty. And I think there's a comment about that in the chat right there now. So that was kind of where we went down that path of developing the gallery. Luckily, we had the skills of Luke and Alex in that space to be able to develop that environment. So we sort of engaged with students in the process of making the gallery with, and understanding what the kind of works were that we needed to cater for, and what are the experiences they expected from their own graduate show and how people might engage with their work. So that was kind of where it took that form of taking on an environment that was familiar, that was more believable, and then we actioned where possible the kind of engagement that people could have with the artworks. And then we talked about how they may be able to capture their traditionally produced works and still maintain an authenticity. If you got up close, you could still see paint strokes, you could still see textural qualities and things that they valued. And I think, yeah, in that comment there, it provided a bridge. There was a resistance just on providing the students an understanding of what we might be doing. And as soon as we started to alleviate that and have the discussion, they actually felt like it was something that they had a value proposition in. So that was kind of underpinning why we went with that approach. The first year that we ran it, we basically had to build it, train students about how to capture their work, supply it, get an army of humans to model it and stick it in environments to go live, and also get the university to engage with Amazon to be able to actually host and run the thing, because they didn't have the capacity. So there was a lot of learning outcomes. And now I guess there's that analytics phase of it too, where we can actually see how people are using it. All we could capture the first part was how wide it went. So we had 149 countries touch that site during the 5 days of the live moment, and then it stays as an archival gallery beyond that. So we were able to explain to the university and to our school and faculty the reach or the engagement from this, just in terms of the international touch points. And now with Alex's research, we've got a capacity to actually understand a bit more about how people use the gallery and quantify that impact a bit more in terms of engagement. So just a little bit of context, I guess, for why we went that path and some of the things that have been happening in terms of discussions around that gallery space for their own students, and now how we look to use it. We've used it for our PhD symposiums for students in the creative industries, students working in a 3D capacity, where a 3D molecule that someone's been working on in terms of visualizing science has been enlarged in a room, and you can walk through the science, if you want to think about it that way, and it can be explained in that sense of experiencing the structure of what they've created in a 3D form, and not just necessarily have it on a plinth. At the same time, we've looked at photogrammetry and capturing assets that are handmade or in existence there, and placing them into the gallery as well. So there's a whole range of activities that then we can sort of bring to the table to shape this exhibition and keep working with them.
Just to add to that, Andrew, as well, on what we found with the focus on that traditional environment, that was somewhat reinforced when we started looking at tests of presenting this in virtual reality earlier this year. We've not published anything in that space, but when you put someone in the virtual environment and it's somewhat more abstract, you deal with similar problems to what the visual effects industry does, where you've got that almost uncanny valley. Someone doesn't look quite right, or it's out of proportion to what we would expect in the world. You focus more on that rather than the work. But so when taking it into VR, if it wasn't more traditional, people would get distracted with almost the novelty of VR and the wacky thing that they don't normally see, and it would detract from the presentation of the work itself. So that was the underpinning, was to make sure that the work was forward rather than the experience itself.
Thank you. Linda, thanks.
I was just, yeah, I mean, I agree with lots of what everybody's saying. I think as well, the potential is there for, first of all, a kind of guiding citation. So if people want to talk about what this is, we should help them cite it in the correct way. So that's important to have somewhere up front, so that people can understand how to cite it if they want to write about it or, review it or whatever. But I'm thinking that would be useful to have within the site as well, so that, I mean, obviously in a traditional show, people would come and you'd invite reviewers and you'd do press releases, and you hope that somebody does a really nice review in a very good publication, a good newspaper or whatever. But it would be interesting to stretch that as well, so you can kind of do that work. But I think having the ongoing response and review space within the site is also really would be really useful, because that would invite people who we hope are of note to come and write something like a blog post or some kind of review commentary or something like that. And I think that would be really useful as well. And to anybody who's cited the show or any works in the show, say within their thesis or their own work, an influence or anything like that, to have a space where that can be recorded within the space, that would be useful, I think.
That'd be brilliant. As I say, we're just testing whether this is going to work and whether it will match what we need to do for the research assessment exercises. Martin, you've done a few of these research assessment exercises. Thank you, Linda. What's your take on all this?
Well, just waking up really, Mario, at the moment.
I'm sorry, mate. I'm going to bed in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, well, when I say done research assessment exercises, I've been working with people submitting stuff that I do, but the trouble is, I'm a bit of a traitor in the sense that most of what I do now is in the form of books. But I think from what I'm seeing, I think, yes, what you were saying earlier about the importance of well, the publish or perish, and it is a form of publishing, and I think the way what I'm seeing so far, I think it all makes good sense, to be honest.
Wow, thank you. Well done, Luke and Alex, I think, and everyone else.
Yeah, I wish I had something to contribute, but I don't really at the moment.
Well, you need to be a peer review of reviewer. That's what we need. We need.
Well, that might be. Experiment. That would look like a bit of an inside job, wouldn't it?
No, we need to have, this is an experiment. Nobody's going to get promotion or fired on this. But unless we do this experiment, I actually think you can see what they've done to us in the art schools. Lawrence, you're keeping quiet, so I'm going to pick on you now. Thank you, Martin. Mr. Zeegan, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
What do you reckon? Does this make sense to you? You're a smart chap.
It makes sense. I mean, I think the point that was made around making sure the citations are correct makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's a kind of, I hate to say it's a kind of dull stuff, but it's the important stuff, because without that, it won't be recognised, it won't be picked up, and it won't, constitute relevant research. I mean, to all intents and purposes, there's a danger that, because to some degree we're kind of on the nursery slopes of research in terms of how long we've been around and the potential for the trajectory. There's a tendency, if we're not careful, to not be ambitious enough or not be confident enough. And I think what's certainly helpful about a group like this is that if we only, excuse me 1 second, if we only talk within a kind of echo chamber of our own institutions, there's a danger that our voice gets diminished, and yes, we as individuals or as small research groups, we contribute to research exercises, and the ref and the equivalents around the globe. But the notion that internationally we can share research, we can collaborate on research, and we know how we need to not only identify it, but profile it and make sure it's out there, I think is really key and really important. So it gets my vote. It's interesting, isn't it? Here in the UK, we're past Ref 21. It's all done. The boxes have been shipped out, and the mindset shift almost immediately to Ref 28. Now, not all of us will be around. I mean, let's not say all around, but in jobs or still working for Ref 28. Right. And I think there's a kind of responsibility that we have to recognise that we have for early career researchers, and what we need to do to make sure that the next generation of researchers have got that space to research. And I hear the struggles of the combination of research and teaching, practice, etc. But whatever we can do to instill confidence and enthusiasm amongst early career researchers will be to the benefit of our discipline, I think. Sorry, I have a 5-year-old whispering in my ear as we speak.
Yeah, mine's a vice chancellor normally about that age. Sorry, I don't know what happened there. I just went native. I beg your pardon. I won't be around. I'll be retiring from this institution, and I'm going to come back home to Britain to be, you know, whatever use I can be. I'm so old. I remember when Andrew Selby was actually younger than he is now, and he still seems really young now. And when, you know, I do feel like all of us older people here, we do have a responsibility. And I think the thing I will keep saying is, this is about us. It's up to this group to work out how best to do this. I think we've got a great mixture of skills. I mean, having Luke and Alex here is just great because we can solve all sorts of those kind of problems. And then really it's a case of pushing at, you know, getting all the details right. And Martin and Lawrence are bang on. If we don't, and Linda, if we don't get things like the citations, if we don't get the nitty gritty right, it won't count. But I think making sure that we've got, like, the way that, sorry, I'm old enough to remember when they started doing PhDs in art and design in my area, the whole thing was a miracle. Not a process, it was a miracle. And it was, the power relationships were wrong because you had to cling on to your supervisor because there was nowhere was it written down what the hell you needed to do in this process. And I think we're at the same stage now, and we really need to stop this being a miracle or some sort of bloody magical mystery tour. We need to take charge of it, and we need to say, and I'm really with you, Lawrence, we confidently know that this is important shit that we're doing. This is important stuff. It's meaningful, it's culturally significant. You know, whatever her name was, Femina or whatever the woman was in the terrible poster, will be, you know, working in some other industry other than being about, do you know what? I actually think most of the government should be actually digging in the bloody salt mines, but that's just an opinion. The evidence is more important. And I think they can have whatever opinions they have about how we pretty stuff up and teach for them. We need to give them evidence about what we do that's confidently peer reviewed. And it's up to us to do that. So I'm really just looking for agreement to go forward to do this and some commitment to undertaking your work, putting into this system. And then we work out between us what is a proper review process. And to be honest with you, it's not a fix because there's no fix here because no one's getting promoted or fired, but we can interrogate each other in the nicest way because we're all friends and we all want the best for stuff about what do we mean by this, which you can never do with peer reviewers elsewhere. Some of them can decide that they're in architecture and they have no idea what you're doing, but at least we can kind of clarify what we mean by stuff in research. And the fact we've got some people here who are doing PhDs or have started their PhDs, I think that's really important that they're at the beginning of this journey as well, so they can see how we conduct ourselves and that we're fair to everybody. If again, that's sort of what I hope we're doing. Richard Johnson, what do you reckon, mate? You're
Hello, yeah. I've just introduced myself. My name's Richard. You probably haven't seen me around before. I've worked with Marion before and Andrew Selby. They were both my supervisors about 20 years ago, and I've just started my PhD. So I'm kind of here in a you know, in that kind of capacity at the moment. Yeah, I've been listening to this. I think it's interesting. I think I agree with Joe's comment that this feels like a bridge and actually a research project in its own. What I'm really interested in is actually the idea of the speculative nature of what we do and how that gets foregrounded in this project. Because, you know, I'm listening to kind of what Christian was suggesting about the galleries as a traditional thing. How does the speculative nature of what we do fit in that traditional model? I think this is it kind of, you know, how does that get recognized or categorized in this virtual environment that we're setting up? So that's just my observation, really.
Andrew, thank you very much. Andrew.
Yeah, thanks, Murray. I've got an observation actually about, I thought the virtual gallery was really well presented just in terms of like not having seen it before. So thank you very much for doing that, everybody. I also wanted to pick up on the word bridge, because actually I do think there's this thing about the familiarity that we all have around, you know, kind of traditional gallery visitation and potentially what's being offered here. And it strikes me just thinking kind of about what Richard is doing in the kind of early stages of his PhD research around this idea of, like, you know, you are in a kind of autoethnographic position where you're kind of creating work and you're in the moment. There is an opportunity with the virtual gallery to be able to kind of go through the work. And one of the things that kind of interests me is that in previous publishing models that we've had, where we've, you know, written books or we've written papers, or even if we've presented at conferences, it's very hard sometimes to be able to actually go through the work in the sense of the dimensionality of it. So you're kind of taking the recipient of the information on a journey through the process of how it was made and why decisions were made. It's easy to do a kind of longitudinal study where you kind of jump off at particular points and you kind of, you know, it's the equivalent of going on a train journey, I guess, and jumping off at different platforms. But what I like about this engine potentially is the idea of being able to kind of magnify elements or go through elements to see some of the working in the background. And if this had been available to me when I wrote Animation Process, for example, or this would have, you know, that would have changed the nature of that book tremendously. Brilliant. Both in terms of the way that I wrote it, but also I think probably in the way that the audience or the readership read it. So I'm kind of interested in, you know, it sort of goes back to what Christian was saying about the geographies of kind of how these things work, and also how people operate within those geographies, or perhaps, you know, in a speculative nature of what you were saying, Mario, how they reject some of the things that are placed in front of them as well. So there's lots of possibilities here, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that's absolutely right. And I think just to go back to that rigor, I mean, I know a lot of professors now in STEM, they're great friends of mine, and they're saying, you guys you do need your confidence, because some of the stuff that gets published is so iffy. It's speculative. I mean, you would actually say that most of physics is speculative, quite honestly. Well, it is. It's theorized, actually. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I think that business to interrogate something and publish differently is really, I think, will be useful. Tim, I know you didn't have your hand up, but I'm just asking, what do you reckon?
Oh, yeah. Morning.
Happy to take part, that sort of thing.
Yeah, morning, afternoon, evening, everybody. Yeah, really interesting conversation. I'm enjoying listening to it. I mean, my thoughts, I keep thinking about the bit right at the beginning about this sort of speculative nature of our research and how we find the time and sort of space to do that. So I'm listening to this conversation, working out the authenticity of how we present it and how it gets reviewed. At the same time, I'm going into meetings in the university. Lawrence talked about Ref 21's just been completed. We shift straight to Ref 28. Actually, there's a more kind of immediate set of circumstances facing the institution where I am, where I'm noticing a real sort of drive towards data-driven metrics to measure everything we do very, very quickly as we come out of this pandemic, whether it's to do with recruitment, whether it's to do with the efficacy of the courses, whether it's to do with how we make our research. And it's, you know, that is very challenging environment to sort of find the space to make this speculative research. And if this format, this group, and this way in which we can exhibit our work and get it reviewed allows us to be free to make that speculative research, I think that's a really positive thing, and I kind of really like that.
I think it comes down to something. Look, I'm in the company of other people who've been deans and heads of school, so I'll just bow to everyone here. But it comes down to this: if I was your boss, you have X amount of days for research, X amount of days for, and if your research does not count and you do not have a peer group, they're not going to fund it. And eventually and actually at the end of the day, the thing is, if there's a vacuum, nature will fill it. So if we don't have this kind of research, that's the point we're trying to make. You're absolutely right. The data analytics will completely drive this. and you'll end up with just statistics people rather than actually anything to do with human experience. And how we experience the world isn't just measurable through data. We know that. So it's a really interesting challenge that we've shied away from a little bit. I'm conscious of losing people to go into work. Thank you, Tim. I just want to include Zara. You look shocked.
It's all right. It was just because I was
I'm losing
going,
people.
oh, we need to unmute. Hi, yeah, so I'm Zara Wood. I'm now at Ravensbourne University in London. I'm a senior lecturer in illustration. Yeah, this has been incredibly interesting. I'm kind of taking it all in. I always make notes because that just, you know, visual notes.
Oh, good. Well. Could you send them to me, please? Because I never make notes. Really, again, really bad at this. It'd be really good if you. Andy, don't laugh at Andrew. Not Selby. Andy, the other one. Sorry.
I was just about to say that's why we recorded it, Mario.
Yeah, exactly. But it's always good to just, like, you know, because we're often, what we're doing is we're translators when we're working as commercial illustrators. So it really helps to take in all the information. And I kind of always see these things almost if I was working for a client. So there's just tons of really interesting stuff here. Both, I think it's interesting because I've been umming and ahhing the last couple of years about starting my PhD. So this is quite interesting for me to maybe start it and dive in. I think
you've got a lot of supervisors that could help you here.
Yeah. So it's just fascinating. I think there's I suppose it's just that kind of thing of, because we are translators, obviously we will have something that we want to research and talk about, but I think there's a huge scope here, as already has been spoken about collaboration. So there's lots of things that we can do to collaborate, often with scientists and thinking about how we could sort of use this platform that we've been discussing about that. I think the conversation is, yes, will this be seen as research by the wider kind of academic community? But there's also scope of doing really interesting things, I suppose, both academically and commercially in terms of partnerships. I think that's what I'm seeing.
Well, that's very wise. Yeah.
And especially with like funding, because in the UK, everything's being taken out of arts and going into technology and science. So if we can find a way of kind of, which I think we can, of integrating that. I think in terms of like the virtual gallery, Luke mentioned it right at the beginning, we're obviously still in the context of this pandemic. So having something familiar, when that idea, you know, everybody's been in lockdown. So the familiarity of what we would consider a normal physical gallery. But then I think it's the add-ons that we can also have. So Linda mentioned about neurodiversity and having this space for people to fully feel like they can access it and welcome into that. And then Andrew's been talking about the behind the scenes. So I immediately thought of audio interps again as an additional. So we can have all of these things. We don't have to just have one of these things. So we can have a space that is familiar, and then we've got this scope again, which would be very useful academically to actually talk about the work. And I often think with those, it doesn't have to be pieces to camera. It doesn't have to be, we don't all have to be presenters. I think audio transcriptions and audio radio is a really good way of discussing visuals, the behind the scenes of the visuals to accompany that. And I just also wondered, I mean, if there's loads of scope to do tons of things, but we could also even partner with architects to design our gallery space. So there's just like a million of ideas, and I suppose it's what we concentrate on this on this second one for you guys at Newcastle, but our first one together.
Well, I think the most important stuff for all of us is the first thing you said. which is the way that everything shifted away from us. So let me give you the mechanism. Sorry, I'm really boring. I have been on ARC assessment panels in other countries. It goes like this. Everything we do, there is an authority that will look at it, and they're the people who fund us. So the reason we're concentrating on creating an NTRO policies, because there isn't one, we then need to test it so that we get away from just written stuff, which is fine, but we don't all just do written stuff. We just like chemistry will theorize and then make an experiment, we may be theorizing, translating, and creating this thing called a visual artwork, which is our experiment, our proof of concept, if you like. So the authority wants to see that we actually are researching within the boundaries that they've set to fund us. They will fund us within that thing. Now, this is the kicker. This is where we win. So they do that. And do you know who they look to tell them whether it is actually research? The peers. And we are the peers. And I would go back to the wonderful gentleman who said, will you please have have some confidence in ourselves and step forward and say, we are the peers. Here's the first test. This is just a test of whether we can do it. So we've got, they fund you if you are within what is called research. And the definitions of that is, it's fine, we can lay those out in the forms. We then get the peers to test and attest, and this peak body would be the peers to say, this is where the research lies, this is what we're doing. Here are the three categories. Do you fall in that? Do we test it? And from there, you also have this other thing that if you want to get funding, you have to have really an industry partner. I'm just going to flick in something on FastLab, because we've created FastLab entirely from direct funding from industry for art and design, for the creative industries. So there's a kind of little experiment already in this chaotic space called FastLab. This is another piece where we evidence and test, use a test whether we can really do this. And I think that's to your point. How do we stop the disintegration of what we're doing? Well, we have to Lawrence's point and Martin's point, we have to play the game. And we have to do something we've been accused of not being good at, which is actually work together. And we haven't been good as a group of people across the world, compared to the scientists, compared to business people. So does that sort of make sense, Zara, or am I completely mad?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think there's huge scope here to get partnership funding from different industry. I wouldn't almost go down a route of almost creative industries, because that's a sector that we work in. It's actually understand, we have to be careful with ethics and all things like that. But I think there's huge scope to get industry funding with this. But it's with all these things, it's kind of, the questions that we would ask with our illustrations, which is who is our audience? And we've got quite two distinct audiences here, which is the academic audience and then the industry, and that's potentially what this whole forum is. That's exactly right, isn't it? Because it's like raising.
You bang on. Those are the two. Those are the only two actually that we've placed. But it's also, but we're testing ourselves against those, and we're actually the people who will have to do the litmus test on that.
And I suppose like something that came up, which was like, everybody's hungry for data, and there's almost too many ways of getting the data, but it's like, what is the data that you want, and what is it?
How do you visualize it?
And that's the whole thing. And that's with clients, work with clients, it's like, how many people liked it on Facebook? Well, who gives a what's it about how many, unless that translates into what you want them to do. So I think it's like, we're all intelligent people here. It's looking at what we want to find out from that data, and then working out how we get that. So I was thinking, that like came up with,
just quickly before I go to the others, just on the data, my wife did this amazing data book as a children's book, and it was about early onset Alzheimer's, and it's called One Photo. It's all over America at the moment. You can get it online. And it doesn't look like a data book. It's a very emotional book about what happens to humans, but it's based on the data of what happens to humans, but it's visualized in a humane way. So that's the narrative that we can engage in. So yeah, that's again, that will be news to some of our peers outside of this discipline. Martin, you had your hand up, so I'm going to thank you, Zara. Martin Salisbury, sir, you're unmuted.
Oh,
thank you, Zara.
My favourite trick. I think there are some people who were before me, Mario.
Oh, okay. Who was before? Well, I'm just going to go to Linda, because Linda's bound to be before, because it's at the hour end. Linda, you go next.
Well, I'm not sure who put their hand up first, but I was just thinking that the great thing about this kind of site is its permeability, that it isn't a physical space. And I think because it's got these kind of permeable fields rather than walls, if you like, it suits a kind of transdisciplinary approach to research, which we've all had to kind of put those shoes on over our career, because of the kind of shift towards neoliberal capitalist. Don't get me on my soapbox, but anyway, I think this space actually would draw people in who are possibly unfamiliar with illustration as not only a research practice, but as a creative practice or any kind of practice. And I think the idea of that, the permeability of the work, when you were saying about going through the work into the background, Luke, that what could be on either side of those things could be that kind of the transdisciplinary nature of the person. So for example, you've got the work being one discipline, but you've got publishing, you've got industry partnerships, you've got commercial work. And so the person can sit, if you like, in amongst that virtual organization, and draw. I mean, there'd be people who read my written publications who don't know much about my visual work, for example. And that's probably the same for all of us, and I think the great thing about this, and is something to promote through its research potential, is the way in which it captures that very difficult way of being a transdisciplinary academic who has an art practice but is also in the academy, and how that works for us. And to me, that's one of the great NTRO strengths of this kind of project, is it actually addresses the academic in question.
It's really good. Yeah, thank you. Ari, I'm going to come to you next.
Yeah,
okay.
I just thought I'd mention it just for the people listening outside of this particular group too in the conversation, just to preface, I guess, how we came to this conversation. The first two initial meetings, and the idea that people at all stages, whether they're considering doing a PhD or just started, or someone like myself who completed theirs more recently, and Mario was my supervisor, one of my supervisors, is that the conversation that I first talked to Mario about was just where the building of this sort of more international conversation, and then with Alan's visit as well to Newcastle, just building this conversation slowly. And it's been so interesting to sort of see the peers respond, the similarities of conversation in the first and initial meeting around drawing, the role of drawing, what drawing looks like across teaching, across research, across pretty much everybody's work that they're doing, and or writing about in Martin's case as well. So, I just think that it's sort of important just to note those things about where it sort of came from too, and that there has been lots of similarities prior to this conversation, and that it is kind of like, we all just want a really supportive process for us as well, I guess. Does that make sort of sense, Mario?
Yeah, it does. And we are intending to be really good colleagues and just do the right thing for our discipline. What else is there to do? Martin, sir.
Yeah, what I wanted to just raise is an aspect that always troubles me about illustration research, and it relates to what I see David Blaiklock has put in the chat which I entirely agree with. It's about, you know, thinking about what illustration research practice is and could be. With exhibitions like this, I mean, I'm wondering, does it mean that we're thinking the kind of illustration practice that kind of plays best for university research traditions is that which is more authorial, reportage, all this kind of thing, which is easier to place? But if we look back to the traditional illustration teaching, where you would have a highly respected book illustrator, for instance, teaching part-time and then getting on with his or her practice, where illustration could be said to be subordinate to the written word, and also in editorial work, is that kind of work simply a creative practice that can't be placed in a sort of research context? Is it less valid? And so that's why I sort of come back to, you know, what are the possibilities for illustration research? Because you could end up saying, you know, that where illustration meets fine art is where we're doing research, you know. And so how do we distinguish clearly between illustration research and fine art research?
I don't know, but that's why we're doing research on this now as a group.
We're doing research
I think
on research.
Well, we need to know how to position that you've just described, because actually this is, well, it's not the only thing we're doing here. We've actually got 3 categories, and we're testing that within those categories. And it may be that sits in practice based, because there's already a base for that practice that you're interrogating. It is actually, you know, that at the end of the day, research is about the question you've asked, and then the practice is actually the way that you make it real. And I think if I twisted this the other way around, I would say that everything else is speculative in the university. We're the only people who can visualize what the hell we're doing. But we've never seen it that way.
But you know, what I'm talking about is the traditions of the very, very highest quality commercial art. You know, I think of somebody like my former colleague, John Lawrence, a very old friend, who was one of the great book illustrators of the 20th century. But, you know, his passion was working with literature or contemporary writers. And he always saw it as kind of serving the written word, you know, and he's the sort of old school illustration lecturer who would never dream of thinking of himself in relation to research or the academic world. So, I mean, do we have to leave that behind us totally?
No, because it's the rules are, I'm really boring. The rules are, in his case, was there a peer review process to commission him? Well, there was, the publisher. I almost don't overthink it. It's like, if it's been published and there's been peers who reviewed it, like an art director and an editor and a writer, that actually, those are deeper questions you're asking, and that might be something we look at further down the line. But in terms of just getting us under the bar and keeping us actually in the game, we've only got to actually prove that if he's a book illustrator, that book that he did was peer commissioned, and that would fit the current category, that would fit it. And if we say that is right, that category that's been set up, we're supporting as the first step in terms of research. Then the deeper questions that you're asking, which is almost like a PhD, and you know, the function of illustration in that, you know, new language of visualizing a different language into another language. That's really interesting, but it's probably, it's good further down the line. But at this stage, if he's been commissioned, it's peer reviewed, it counts.
Yeah, but I mean, even pragmatically, I'm thinking my experience of the last couple of research assessment exercises, REFs, it's that kind of work, even if it is the most kind of admired within the profession, is the hardest to make arguments for impact and this kind of thing. So
yeah, I agree, and I think
we'll have to think about. I think.
Yeah, we will, and I think part of that as well. I think you're right. I'm not dismissing that. You are right, but I have to say, some of the peer group that I've seen are not our peers. We've got people who look at us from history, who look at us from English, and we might have someone from fine art if we're bloody lucky. It's just it's been a mess because we were so late into these institutions. And to be honest, we've never tried to form something like this. We've had offshoots, but never something that's this kind of comprehensive.
No.
And we're at the start of it, you know.
That's a very positive thing.
Right. Yeah, it's just trying, really. And we'll muddle through. David Blaiklock, I love you, man. I love the work. You always like my stuff, so I love you lots. Oh,
I'm just sucking up to you, Mario.
You're just great. I love your stuff as well. No, the points you make, can you elucidate them a little bit more? I think it's really
sure. I think that from what I've read and seen about the field, because I'm doing my PhD at the moment, and it's on the nature of illustration expertise, so I'm kind of right amongst it all.
Brilliant.
The issue is we don't really explain ourselves well. Well, we do actually. We do really explain ourselves well when it comes to technical practice. We're so good at that, right? But that's, to be honest, that's all we're good at. Well, it's not all that. We're really good at that, and that's something to be really celebrated. The issue for us in academia and for the wider community is that we don't explain our impact on society very well. And that is where research is. That's what people want to know about. And the problem I've found is that I haven't seen a succinct statement about everything that we do, and encapsulates it really well in the way that people outside of our field understand. And I think that's the problem, because when we are pitching these things to other academics, or we're researching with other academics, we're always struggling for words to explain what our value is to society. And I think I was hoping that this group would be able to try and articulate that. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. I haven't worked it out. Like, it's pretty tricky to do. And actually, that's something to celebrate for the field, that it is tricky, because it means that there's a massive depth in the field. It means there's a depth of practice, a depth of conceptual development, you know, depth of a range of things. And I think that we really need to celebrate our traditional outputs and all of those things that we're already really good at, and then just recognise how diverse practitioners are and how flexible they are. And I think that's what one of the strengths is. I always describe illustration as having a foot in design and a foot in art, and that kind of gives you everything. You know, it gives. I've been looking at around the world at drawing. I mean, Ari was talking about drawing. The fact is that drawing has been discarded by every design discipline across the world. Like, everywhere you ask, it's just been whittled away. It's fundamental to language. It's a fundamental language form. You know, if you can't draw, you can't speak. It's amazing. Like, and when you dig into the linguists and all of those things that are happening, then I think that's kind of where we need to be first, starting with this argument. That's from my perspective. Anyway, it's my perspective. If we start from that position with exhibitions like this, then you've got a pivot point where you can push off in any direction, any kind of research methodology you like. But if we don't establish that straight up front, as a group, you know, kind of agree on what the wording might be and how that might be perceived, then we won't be able to. This is, I think, what Martin's. I think you're thinking like this, Martin, that it might just be another exhibition that people misunderstand. You know. I think that's just being the devil's advocate. I'm not saying that's what it would be, but we need to establish a language around and I guess a story, if you like, which is probably what we're good at. A story around what our expertise is. You know, what are we really good at? What are we offering to society? Because we all believe that, and I think each expert in the field understands tacitly what we're good at, but you try and explain it to someone who says, what do you do? What's your research? You know, I'm like this, and so I just, you know,
that's why you do a PhD. That's why you do a PhD. You learn how to do research.
You learn how to speak the language. Yeah, that's right.
Well, you do know how to do research as well. It's not just the language. I think it is understanding the nuts and bolts of research. Can I say honestly, physics has had the same problem throughout history. If you are in a branch of Newtonian physics, as opposed to quantum physics, Newtonian physics says the whole of the universe is fixed. Quantum physics, nothing's fixed. So it's not just us. I mean, I actually think we're nearer just having agreed that, you know, drawing that visual language that it is, not merely a technique. So I think we're at the beginning of the conversation that you're describing. I think you're right. Both you and Marty will have the same agendas, the same things, but I think we are having more people doing PhDs. So they're interrogating the language and the mechanism of research for us in ways that they've never done before, because my field was as a practitioner. I just got invited into university because actually no one was coming in and the students were real motivated. That was the real reason. I just got hired because I could get students in and I could help them get jobs. Well, now the game's changed a bit. There's extra to that. And I think this is a really important time to actually make sure all of the questions that you're asking are definitely there, and we give that the address, because I think those are the questions that have dogged us before, but they're not any different to other disciplines. They've just been at it longer, and we didn't belong in the academy in the same way. Roderick, you've been very quiet. Thank you, sir. Thank you, David. Do you have any comments, Roderick?
I think it's a a really positive endeavor, and I think creating kind of communities and networks is kind of very important. I guess my question or my point is, the public experience illustration without going into a gallery. I do have issues around the form of it being a gallery.
Okay, well, the reason it's there is because it's a research exercise, and we need to demonstrate to people what research is, what it looks like, the different categories it's in, and we need to make it disseminable and reachable by a wider audience. That's all.
Which I understand. It's just I think intrinsically illustration has a way of connecting up with society and people in a very different way to maybe the hierarchy of art. So it's just my I'm just thinking of like more experimental forms of maybe publishing, or how we can experience work beyond just the gallery as such.
We could make it more immersive in the next iteration. I mean, we'd like to test the research propositions, if you like, in each of these. And I think then that business of how we present it, if that is pertinent to the language and the impact of it, then I think you're right. We need to have a look at how that might be done. So I think, that's something I think we need to consider in the next iteration.
Cool.
Andrew, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I guess there's a couple of things that I guess it's an exhibition, but it sits outside exhibition in some ways, because we've categorized it in a way which we can capture a breadth of work under a known research type, practice-led, practice-based. But then that speculative space there provides an opportunity to engage people in potentially the process. And we're good at exhibiting outcomes, but this gives us a chance to potentially exhibit the process and interpretation and things like that as instead of the outcome, but introduce people to, I guess, the journey you go through in that. So yes, it gives us a way to actually put works in those categories and create something that we can use to explain what we do to our own institutions, but it also enables us through the layers of interactivity and the possibilities of, for some of the work that I'm doing in digital spaces, I can record my process, or it's recording it for me through the device. And there's a way to engage people in that interpretation of the process, which hasn't been accessible before. And that might sit in that speculative space and help communicate what we find so hard to put into words as what we do and how we do. We can actually show how we do in some cases in that speculative area, and not exhibit an outcome, but exhibit, where the idea or where the problem presented and how you went about trying to produce something without actually getting to that point. So I don't know, I just think gallery, yes, I understand it has that traditional context and it frames it in a certain way, but it does offer us a depth or a layers of information that people can look at, and we can present it in different ways, including non-finished things.
We can try it in a different way as well.
Can I just add to that too, Roderick? I think just for the purposes of this exhibition and the virtual gallery, it really was more about putting a practical application that we could do together as a group of people, a network, something to pull people together to put into this space, rather than exploring perhaps all of the broad contexts outside of it that could be done, and the collaboration that could come out of all of the connections that happen here. But just something that's not just setting up a network and this is, you know, the name of it, but hey, we can pull people in, have a practical exercise that's attached to this conference. Just being, it could be any conference, it doesn't particularly matter. It could have been Confia as well. It's just that it's a good way to bring people in and have some practical outcomes of it as well. Yeah.
Luke and Alex, are there? I mean, we've got the gallery now, but and to, you know, Roderick's point, it is there are some traditions around that may not be helpful in the long run, but in the next iteration, can we do something different?
Oh, we definitely can. I guess that we chose the framework as the gallery, whereas that was what was most familiar to the problem that we were trying to solve at the time. Like, it could quite easily be the story is told through the medium of a virtual 3D street. That's what we chose. I guess the gallery in this case is more just the framework for which the research narrative is told. The form that takes is quite flexible.
Okay, so in summary, Alan, what are we going to say in summary? We're recording this. I look so bad. Come on, Alan.
Well, I think the you know, as far as I can see it, this exhibition it has the great potential to really consolidate what we're all about anyway, and all the things that we have actually here been talking about. You know, and hopefully, in a sense, to establish, and I'm thinking really what David was talking about earlier, about what illustration is, what it says, how it's perceived by so many people. And he's absolutely right. As a visual art form, not many people know what it is. I mean, they really don't. But I mean, some people will know that my latest book was called The Power and Influence of Illustration. And I like to use that term, power and influence, because it smacks right through not just the history of the discipline, but right through to today. And when you consider that the parameters of illustration are getting broader and broader and broader, and Zara was talking about you know, the way in which we can connect with industry and the multidisciplinarity of what illustration is. And I was saying earlier on, Mario, wasn't I, about how some of my students have now gone on to become art directors, and they work in all sorts of ways. And also your point about peer reviews. I mean, yeah, we as a body, you know, are there, but we, and you said about, you know, and this is what Martin was talking about his friend who's a traditional book illustrator and in a sense appears to be subservient to like an author or a writer. Again, recently I was commissioned to illustrate a Ladybird book, but that was peer reviewed through journals and also in newspapers. And it was the illustration that was reviewed first and foremost and got most of the comments. And it's there, and it can be you, and you know. So I'm very positive about this, and I know I sort of jokingly say, you know, my glass is always full, not even half. But no, I think we should. I don't think we should be negative about this, and I think we should move forward with confidence. And I feel quite excited because looking at all the individuals that are involved here, and I know that a lot of our friends and colleagues in the United States, of which there's some great people there, couldn't join us today for obvious reasons. But there's such a diversity of experience, both in the academic world, both in the practice-based commercial world. And drawing upon that, I'm sure that we can come up collectively with a statement, I think, that we can all be happy with. And, you know, to help David with his concept of, well, what is illustration? I'm sure we can do it.
Yeah. So what we're going to try and do is send out to everybody an invitation to take part in the research prototyping exercise, which includes putting stuff in, writing it so that it fits within one of the 3 categories. We'll review that openly. There'll be, it is a peer review, but it's a transparent one so that we can all actually say, well, what did you mean? But without actually getting our knickers in a twist, because this is actually literally an experiment. And actually see then what we learn to feed back to the ARC and the other authorities that say, we as a peer group think this is clunky, or don't think this is right, or this is a good method that we could use. And I think to the point that Roderick made and others and Martin about getting the language as well as the environment right, so that we actually are conducting reviews in a way that peers feel comfortable with and feel that they actually can show the qualities of their research. But it is research. It's not just about the practice. It is about research. Research and practice, there is absolutely a relationship there. And there's plenty of literature for those of you doing a PhD. There is plenty of literature around that. And I'm sure Ari can send you quite a few files on that, as can, yes, anyway, Andrew Howells. But if you would stick with this and take part, I think it'd be useful, providing you're happy to do it. If you're not, then obviously let us know. But I guess we just need this level of people to take part in this so we can really test this and grow and improve what we're trying to do, because it's not going to get any better and no one is going to do it for us. And I'm sick of people. I think you're all in the same boat. I'm sick of people who are non-illustrators, non-practitioners doing it for us, and then we're stuck with it. So that's about it, really. Any more before I wrap up? Or have we, is there anything, any extra points anyone wants to make? Everyone happy? Thank you. I know a couple of people didn't get a chance to speak. I'm really sorry. I'm not very good at sharing anything, which is weird considering how old I am. But do apologize. And the people who left and didn't say anything, I will definitely get them to speak first. Richard, thank you for coming. I just love seeing you there. Alan, thank you. Thank you, Ari. Thank you, Mr. Selby, sir. I think it was Lawrence and Martin and Roderick and Lawrence, wonderful, Zara, Andy, Howells, Luke, and of course, the wonderful Alex. Thank goodness you two actually can deliver some of this stuff in the space. I would be really just doing PowerPoints otherwise. Thank you very much. And is that okay? Should we end it here? Is there anything you're all happy?
Yeah.
Thank you. I hope you'll come to the next one. Cheers.